I realized my brother was lying to us when the courthouse elevator stalled between floors, and no one pressed the emergency button. His attorney kept checking his watch. My niece was humming to herself, off-key, like she always did when she was nervous. The document in my hand was still warm from the copier. No one else had read page 7 yet. They were all smiling, and in less than an hour, everything we believed about our family was going to stop being true. I realized my brother was lying to us when the courthouse elevator stalled between floors, and no one pressed the emergency button. The ceiling light flickered once, steadied, and kept humming. His attorney checked his watch again, thumb rubbing the glass like time might bend if he stared hard enough. My niece hummed to herself, off-key, the way she did when she was nervous. I held a manila folder against my ribs. The paper inside was still warm from the copier. No one else had read page 7 yet. They were all smiling. In less than an hour, everything we believed about our family was going to stop being true. The elevator lurched and continued upward as if nothing had happened. When the doors opened on the 5th floor, the attorney went first, talking about where to stand and who would speak. He was calm in the professional way that reads as confidence until you learn to hear what's missing. My brother followed, shoulders back, jaw set. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. I walked last, my niece's small hand wrapped around 2 of my fingers. She squeezed once and let go. The hallway outside family court smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. A bench along the wall held a woman with a stroller and a man staring at the floor. Our footsteps echoed too loudly. My brother turned and smiled at me, the familiar half-smile he used when he wanted reassurance without asking for it. "We're almost there," he said. He said it like we were headed to a graduation ceremony, not a hearing that would decide where a child slept for the next decade. I had been awake since before dawn. I knew that because I'd watched the sky lighten through the kitchen window while coffee burned on the stove. I'd told myself I was nervous because of the stakes. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. The other part had arrived the night before, quietly, like a splinter you don't feel until you move the wrong way. I'm not a suspicious person by nature. I spent 30 years managing operations for a regional logistics company, which means I learned to trust systems and verify people. I learned that most disasters don't start with malice. They start with assumptions. I retired 2 years ago and moved closer to my brother when his divorce got ugly. I thought I was being useful. I thought I was being loyal. I thought I knew who he was. We were at my kitchen table when the email came in. It wasn't addressed to me. It popped up on my laptop because I was helping him scan documents for the hearing. The subject line was a string of numbers and a dash. I almost ignored it. The sender's name meant nothing. The attachment name did. It used my niece's middle name, spelled wrong. I didn't open it right away. I finished scanning the bank statements my brother wanted labeled as exhibits. I told myself the email was nothing. I told myself a lot of things that night. When I finally clicked the attachment, the file took a second longer than usual to load. That was the strange detail. Not dramatic, just a pause long enough for me to notice my own breathing. The document was a draft, not final. It looked like a custody agreement until you read the footnotes. Footnotes are where the truth hides when people think no one will read them. Page 7 was where my eye stopped. Not because it was shocking at first glance, but because it was precise. Dates, a location, a contingency. The language wasn't legal. It was logistical. I didn't confront my brother then. I didn't wake him. I printed the file and put it back where I found it. I folded the warm pages and slid them into a folder I hadn't used in years. I slept badly and dreamed about elevators. In the morning, we drove downtown together. He talked about parking. He talked about lunch afterward. He asked if I'd brought the character letters. I said yes, and meant the ones I'd written. I didn't mention the others. The city was already loud. The radio played a song from the 90s, and he hummed along. My niece watched the buildings pass and asked if there would be a vending machine. At security, the guard took my belt and waved us through. My brother joked about forgetting his ID. The attorney made a comment about how crowded it was today. No one looked at me. I didn't look at them. I kept thinking about the way the document had loaded, that half-second delay like the computer was weighing whether to let me see it. Outside the courtroom, the attorney pulled my brother aside and spoke in a low voice. My brother nodded, serious now. He glanced at me and lifted his chin. "We've got this," he said. The confidence was practiced. I'd seen him do it in depositions and mediations. It worked on people who wanted to believe. My niece came back to me and leaned against my leg. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo I kept at my house for weekends. She traced the seam on my pant leg with her finger. I wondered if she could feel what I felt. Probably not. Children know when something is wrong, but they don't know why. That's our job. When the clerk opened the door and called our case, my brother took a breath and went in first. The courtroom was smaller than it looked in movies. The judge sat higher than I expected. The chairs were harder. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, like it wanted to be heard. The attorney laid out our exhibits. My brother spoke about stability and routine. He said the words every parent learns to say when they're trying to sound reasonable. The other side listened. The judge asked questions. My niece swung her feet under the table and whispered to herself. I watched the judge's pen move. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and told the truth I was allowed to tell. I talked about school pickups and dinners and bedtime. I talked about how my niece did her homework at my kitchen table and how she liked her toast cut into triangles. I didn't talk about page 7. Not yet. The judge nodded and thanked me. The attorney smiled like we were checking boxes. My brother reached for my hand and squeezed it once, grateful. I squeezed back. The folder under my arm felt heavier than paper should feel. The judge called a short recess. People stood and stretched. The attorney whispered again. My brother checked his watch. My niece asked for water. I went to the clerk's desk and asked if I could submit an additional document for the record. The clerk looked tired. She took the folder without comment and stamped the corner. When we sat again, the judge flipped through the new pages. The room got quiet in a way that wasn't polite. The pen stopped moving. The judge looked up at my brother, then at me. My brother's smile faltered and returned, thinner this time. The attorney shifted in his chair. The judge asked a question that wasn't on anyone's script. My brother answered too quickly. The judge asked another. The attorney stood and started to speak. The judge raised a hand. I watched my brother's face as the meaning of page 7 landed. It didn't explode. It sank. His eyes moved to me. He searched my face for help, for permission, for something to hold on to. I didn't look away. Outside, the hallway noise filtered back in. Somewhere, an elevator chimed. My niece stopped humming and looked up at me, her eyes wide and steady. I put my hand on her shoulder. The judge leaned forward and said my brother's name in a voice that carried weight. The room had shifted. The story we'd rehearsed was no longer the story being told, and I knew, with a calm that surprised me, that what came next would not be undone. I didn't grow up imagining I'd ever be the person who exposed my own brother in a courtroom. Families don't raise children with that lesson in mind. We're taught loyalty early, and we mistake it for virtue long after it stops being one. For most of my life, I believed my brother deserved it. He was the younger one, the charming one, the kind of man people trusted easily. Teachers liked him. Coaches praised him. Even after our parents died, people gravitated toward him as if he carried gravity with him. I learned early to stand slightly to the side. I built my life on being useful, reliable, invisible when necessary. Operations management rewards that. You learn how systems fail and how people hide those failures. You learn that the cleanest disasters are the ones prepared in advance. I didn't think of it as cynicism. I thought of it as competence. And for decades, it kept me from seeing the one system I never audited closely enough, my own family. When my brother's marriage began to unravel, it wasn't sudden. It was loud, then quiet, then loud again. Accusations, apologies, promises. He told me his wife was unstable. He said she was trying to punish him. He said she wanted to hurt him by limiting his access to their daughter. The language was familiar. I'd heard it in conference rooms, when executives framed their mistakes as attacks. I recognized the pattern and dismissed it because it came from him. I moved closer because that's what you do when someone asks for help. I watched my niece on weekends. I learned her routines, her fears, the small tells that told you when she was overwhelmed. I attended school meetings. I smiled at teachers. I told myself I was filling a gap. I told myself I wasn't choosing sides. The truth is, I chose his. The custody process dragged on for months. Mediation failed. Temporary orders became arguments. My brother spoke about fairness and cooperation in public and rage in private. He was careful about who heard what. He knew when to be calm. He knew when to perform. I told myself stress did that to people. I told myself he was protecting his child. It wasn't until the night before the hearing that the shape of it all changed. The document I found wasn't proof of a single lie. It was proof of planning. The dates weren't random. The contingency wasn't hypothetical. It referenced a relocation clause tied to a job offer my brother had mentioned casually months earlier. A job in a different state. A job that hadn't existed then. A job that would exist now, if the custody order allowed it. Page 7 laid it out in language stripped of emotion. If custody were granted under specific conditions, the move would be immediate. School enrollment had already been researched, housing options listed, travel arrangements pre-approved. It wasn't a father reacting to circumstances. It was a strategy designed to remove a child quietly and legally. The most unsettling part wasn't that he'd planned it. It was that he hadn't told me. I was the one watching his daughter. I was the one he trusted to help make it happen without knowing I was doing it. That realization settled into my chest like a weight. It didn't feel like betrayal at first. It felt like clarity. In the courtroom, as the judge questioned him, I watched the performance crack. Not dramatically. Subtly. He over-explained. He corrected details no one had challenged. He looked at the attorney for cues he didn't need. I recognized the signs because I'd seen them in myself when I was hiding operational failures from boards that expected perfection. The judge recessed again and asked counsel to approach. My brother stood too quickly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. The attorney leaned in, whispering urgently now. I sat still. My niece leaned into me and whispered my name, uncertain. I told her it was okay and meant that it would be, eventually. When the judge returned, the tone had shifted. This wasn't a delay anymore. This was scrutiny. Questions became specific. Dates were repeated. The job offer was mentioned out loud. My brother's jaw tightened. He glanced back at me once, sharp and confused, like he'd only just realized I wasn't where he thought I was. The judge ordered a pause, not a recess, a pause. She asked for additional documentation. She asked for time. The hearing ended without a ruling. In the hallway, my brother turned on me the moment the doors closed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stepped close and spoke through his teeth. "What did you do?" he asked. "I told the truth," I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady. "You blindsided me," he said. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "So does she." He looked past me, scanning faces, recalculating. The attorney intervened, talking about next steps, about strategy. My brother nodded mechanically. He didn't look at me again. We rode the elevator down in silence. This time, when it slowed, the emergency button lit up. Someone pressed it without comment. The doors opened on the ground floor. People stepped out. Life continued. Outside, my brother stopped and turned to me. His face had rearranged itself into something controlled and familiar. "We'll talk later," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. I drove my niece home. She asked if she was in trouble. I told her no. She asked if her dad was mad. I told her adults get mad sometimes when plans change. She accepted that answer the way children do, storing it for later. That night, after she fell asleep, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief. A woman's voice, measured and calm. She said her name. She said she was my brother's ex-wife. She said she thought I might want to talk. I didn't call back right away. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the folder. The edges were bent now. The pages had cooled. What I'd thought was an ending was turning out to be an opening. I called her the next morning. She didn't sound angry. She sounded tired. She thanked me for what I'd done. She said she'd been trying to prove something for months and couldn't. She said my submission changed the direction of the case. She paused, then said there was more. Things she hadn't known how to explain without sounding paranoid. We met 2 days later at a coffee shop near the courthouse. She brought a thin binder. Inside were emails, text messages, and notes from conversations she'd written down because something told her to. Dates matched, phrases repeated. The same language my brother used with me appeared in messages he'd sent her, adjusted slightly for audience. Then she showed me something I hadn't expected. A series of invoices from a consulting firm. Not legal, not psychological, logistical. The same kind I'd approved for decades at work. Planning documents, risk assessments, relocation timelines. My brother hadn't just planned to move. He'd planned for resistance. He'd planned for failure. He'd planned for how to make the outcome look inevitable. The final page in the binder wasn't from him. It was from the firm. A note, unsigned, referencing a contingency involving family cooperation. My name appeared once, misspelled. I closed the binder slowly. The coffee had gone cold. The noise of the shop faded. I thought about all the weekends, all the rides, all the ways I'd been positioned as a solution when I was part of the mechanism. The collapse I'd sensed in the elevator wasn't just about custody. It was about identity, about realizing that the person I'd defended for decades didn't see me as family, but as an asset. And now that I saw it, there was no way to unsee it. The judge scheduled the continuation hearing for 10 days later. 10 days to decide where my niece would live, where she would go to school, and which version of her father the court would believe. 10 days for my brother to regroup. 10 days for me to understand how deeply I had been woven into something I never agreed to be part of. Time does strange things when you know what's coming. It stretches in the wrong places and disappears in others. Mornings felt endless. Nights collapsed into brief, shallow sleep. I went through my routines because that's what I had always done when pressure mounted. I made lists. I checked locks. I reviewed documents. I didn't call my brother. He didn't call me. My niece stayed with me under the temporary order. She adapted the way children do, with a resilience that makes adults feel both proud and ashamed. She asked practical questions. Where would she sleep if she stayed here longer? Would she still see her friends? Did her dad know where her favorite book was? I answered what I could and learned to say I don't know without trying to soften it. The ex-wife and I spoke daily. Not about feelings, about facts, dates, gaps. The consulting firm appeared again and again in her records, always indirectly, always just far enough away to deny intent. I knew that structure. It was designed to be defensible. Plausible deniability was its own line item. On the 4th day, my brother's attorney emailed me directly. Polite, professional. He suggested a meeting to clear the air. I declined. I wasn't angry. I just understood the purpose. Meetings like that exist to gather information, not resolve anything. I had spent my career on the other side of them. On the 5th day, my brother showed up at my house, unannounced. It was early evening. My niece was coloring at the table. I saw his car through the window before the doorbell rang. The sight of it sent a quick, sharp reaction through me that I didn't bother naming. I told my niece to keep coloring and opened the door. He looked the same and different at once. Familiar posture, familiar face, something harder behind the eyes. He didn't ask to come in. He stepped past me like the house was still his territory. "We need to talk," he said. I closed the door and stood between him and the kitchen. "You can say what you came to say," I told him, "but you won't do it in front of her." He glanced toward the table, then back at me. "I'm not here to upset her." "Then you should leave," I said. His mouth tightened. He lowered his voice. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand exactly what I've done," I said. "You just don't like it." He laughed once, quietly. "You think this is about right and wrong? This is about outcomes. She would have been fine. You plan to move her across state lines without telling her mother, I said. Without telling me. She would have adjusted, he said. Kids do. So do systems, I said. Until they don't. He stepped closer. You've always been dramatic. I didn't respond. He waited for me to fill the silence. I didn't. That tactic works on people who need resolution. I didn't. You think you're protecting her, he continued. You're not. You're destabilizing her. You're destabilizing everything. You did that, I said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't happening. His eyes flicked toward the hallway. My niece laughed at something she'd drawn. The sound seemed to irritate him. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed. It isn't. He left without saying goodbye to her. The door closed behind him with more force than necessary. My niece looked up. Was that Dad? She asked. Yes, I said. Is he mad? She asked. He's disappointed, I said, choosing the word carefully. Sometimes adults confuse the two. She nodded and went back to coloring. That night, I went through my files again. The consulting firm's invoices had a pattern I'd missed the first time. The timing aligned with my brother's requests for help. Specific favors. Specific weekends. Specific errands that placed me exactly where I needed to be to smooth transitions. I'd thought I was helping him manage chaos. I was helping him create it. On the 7th day, the ex-wife forwarded me an email she'd just received. It was from the consulting firm. Brief. Formal. It referenced the upcoming hearing and asked for confirmation that family cooperation contingencies remained viable. There was a CC line this time. My brother's personal email, and mine. I stared at my name on the screen. The misspelling was consistent. That mattered. It meant they'd copied it from an earlier document, one I hadn't seen. I forwarded the email to my attorney. Yes, I had one now. That had been a decision I didn't hesitate over. Experience had taught me that waiting to need counsel was the fastest way to lose control of a situation. The attorney called me within the hour. He didn't waste time. Do not respond, he said. Do not speak to your brother without me present. And start preparing for the possibility that this becomes bigger than custody. Bigger how? I asked. Bigger in that it may involve fraud, he said. Or conspiracy, or both. I looked at my niece across the room. She was lining up her crayons by color. Order out of chaos. What do I need to do? I asked. You need to be ready, he said. The next hearing isn't just about where she lives. It's about intent. And someone is going to try to control the narrative. On the 9th day, the court clerk called to confirm the schedule. The hearing would begin at 9. Both parties were required to be present. Additional witnesses might be called. The judge had requested supplemental filings. My brother texted me that night. A single line. You don't have to do this. I didn't reply. The morning of the hearing arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully, neutral colors, nothing that suggested performance. My niece wore a sweater she liked because it had pockets. I checked that she had her book. I checked that the folder was in my bag. I checked my phone and turned it off. We parked in the same garage. The same elevator waited. This time, it rose smoothly, no pause, no flicker. My brother stood on the other side of the car, his attorney beside him. No one spoke. The doors opened. We stepped out. In the hallway, the ex-wife joined us. She nodded once. Her attorney carried a thick briefcase. The consulting firm's name was visible on a tabbed folder in his hand. That was the moment I understood the real deadline. It wasn't the judge's ruling. It was the point at which the truth would either surface completely or be buried under procedure. There would be no middle ground. We took our seats. The courtroom filled. The clock ticked. At exactly 9, the judge entered. As the hearing began, I felt something settle into place. Not fear, not relief, certainty. Whatever story my brother had been telling himself was about to be tested against evidence that didn't care who he was to me. And as I placed the folder on the table and opened it to page 7, I knew this wasn't just about stopping a plan. It was about ending a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight for years, waiting for the right moment to be exposed. The judge began by reviewing the supplemental filings in silence, Pages turned. The room waited. I'd learned long ago that silence in a formal setting isn't empty, it's active. It presses on people differently depending on what they're hiding. My brother sat straight-backed, hands folded, his expression carefully neutral. His attorney leaned back slightly, confidence worn like a jacket that had fit well for years. When the judge looked up, she didn't start where anyone expected. "Mr. Hayes," she said, using my brother's name, "I want to clarify something before we proceed." He nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." "These consulting invoices," she said, tapping a page. "They predate the filing of your relocation request by several months. Can you explain their purpose?" My brother didn't answer immediately. That was the first crack. Not a big one, just a delay long enough for me to notice his throat tighten when he swallowed. "They were exploratory," his attorney said smoothly. "My client was assessing options in the event." "In the event of what?" the judge asked, not unkindly, but firmly. "In the event the custodial arrangement became unworkable," the attorney replied. The judge turned a page. "According to this," she said, "the contingency planning includes confirmed school availability, housing deposits, and transportation logistics scheduled within 72 hours of a favorable ruling." She looked up again. "That's not exploratory." The attorney shifted. My brother leaned forward slightly, as if proximity might help. "Your Honor," he said, "I was trying to be prepared, that's all." The judge nodded once. "Prepared for what, exactly?" "For my daughter's future," he said. "Stability." The word hung in the air. Stability. It sounded good. It always did. The ex-wife's attorney stood. "Your Honor, may I?" he asked. "Go ahead," the judge said. He approached the bench with a document. "This is an email exchange between the consulting firm and Mr. Hayes," he said, dated 6 months ago. It references a family cooperation component intended to minimize resistance during the transition. The judge read. Her expression didn't change, but something hardened behind her eyes. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "who is referenced here as the cooperating family member?" My brother's gaze flicked toward me before he could stop it. It was instinctive, telling. The judge followed his eyes. I felt the room turn in a subtle way, attention redirecting, not hostile, curious. "My sister," my brother said, then corrected himself. "My sibling." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Was she aware of this role?" "No," he said quickly. "That's not what—" The judge held up a hand. "Answer the question." He hesitated. "Not explicitly." The judge nodded slowly. "So you planned a relocation that depended on her actions without her knowledge?" "It wasn't like that," he said. His voice had lost some of its polish now. "She was helping. She always helps." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, recognition. The judge turned to me. "Miss Hayes," she said, "did you know your assistance was being used in this way?" "No," I said. "I did not." The judge studied my face for a moment, then looked back at my brother. "You represented yourself to this court as acting transparently and in good faith," she said. "This evidence suggests otherwise." The attorney attempted to regain control. He spoke about misunderstandings, about stress, about the complexity of divorce. He spoke well. He spoke often. The judge listened, then began asking questions that cut through the language. Dates, names, decisions. The consulting firm's representative was called, a man in a gray suit with careful posture and a practiced tone. He spoke about scenarios and planning and standard procedures. He avoided words like manipulation and intent. The judge didn't. "Did your firm design a plan to relocate a minor child immediately following a custody ruling?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Did that plan include strategies to reduce interference from the child's mother?" she asked. He paused. "We identify risks. Did it include strategies to leverage extended family involvement?" she asked. "Yes," he said again. "Were those family members informed?" she asked. "No," he said. The judge leaned back in her chair. The courtroom felt smaller. My brother spoke again, more urgently now. "Your Honor, none of this means I'm a bad father. I love my daughter." The judge met his gaze. "Love is not the issue before this court," she said. "Conduct is." She turned to the clerk. Please mark these exhibits as admitted. A quiet sound rippled through the room. Not shock, understanding. Then something unexpected happened. The judge asked to see the full contract with the consulting firm. The attorney hesitated. Your Honor, that document contains proprietary. I will decide what is relevant, the judge said. Produce it. The document was handed over. The judge flipped through it, then stopped. She looked at a section I hadn't seen yet. Her finger traced a line. She read it twice. This clause, she said slowly, references escalation procedures in the event of non-compliance by cooperating parties. She looked up. What does escalation entail? The consultant cleared his throat. In some cases, legal pressure. In others? The judge prompted. Reputational leverage, he said. The room went very quiet. The judge's eyes moved to my brother. Were you aware of this clause? He didn't answer. Mr. Hayes, she said, were you aware of this clause? Yes, he said, finally. I felt my stomach drop, not because of what he'd said, but because of what it implied. Reputational leverage wasn't abstract. It meant pressure, threats, information used selectively. The judge turned to me again. Miss Hayes, she said, were you ever pressured to act in specific ways regarding your niece's care or custody? I thought about the requests, the timing, the errands, the expectations, the way refusal had never really been an option without consequences. Yes, I said, I was. The judge nodded once, decisively. Thank you. She looked back at the attorneys. This court is not going to reward strategic deception, she said, nor will it tolerate the use of third parties to circumvent transparency. She paused, then added, and this matter may require referral beyond this court. My brother's face had gone pale. His attorney whispered urgently. The consulting firm's representative stared straight ahead. The judge ordered a temporary modification to the custody arrangement, favoring the mother, pending further review. She scheduled an additional hearing and requested full disclosure of all related communications. As the gavel came down, I felt the weight of what had just happened settle fully. The plan my brother had built wasn't just unraveling. It was being exposed layer by layer in a way that couldn't be undone. Outside the courtroom, he didn't speak to me. He walked past as if I were a stranger. His attorney followed, already making calls. The ex-wife stood beside me. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just exhaled, long and slow. My niece tugged on my sleeve. Can we go get lunch now? She asked. Yes, I said. We can. As we walked toward the elevator, I thought about the clause the judge had read aloud. Escalation, reputational leverage. I realized then that the custody plan had never been the endgame. It had been the opening move. Once you see the pattern, you can't stop seeing it. It's like learning a new word and suddenly hearing it everywhere. On the drive home from court, my mind replayed moments I'd filed away as unimportant at the time. They resurfaced now, rearranged into something coherent and ugly. It started small, years ago, after our parents died. My brother took the lead on settling the estate. He said it made sense because he lived closer. I agreed. He sent me summaries instead of full statements, told me not to worry about details. I've got it handled, he said. I remember feeling relieved. I also remember never asking to see the paperwork. Then there were the favors. He was good at asking in ways that didn't sound like requests. You're already so good with her, he'd say about my niece. She listens to you. Or, it's easier if you do it. She feels safe with you. Each time, it sounded like trust. Each time, it positioned me exactly where he needed me. When the divorce began, the requests intensified. Could I keep her an extra night? Could I take her to that appointment? Could I talk to her teacher, since she liked me? None of it felt wrong on its own. It felt like stepping up. It felt like family. But patterns aren't made of single actions. They're made of repetition with intent. At work, I used to teach new managers how to spot operational manipulation. The signs were boring, not dramatic. Control of information, delegation without transparency, creating dependency, while framing it as empowerment. I had delivered those lessons dozens of times. I just never thought to apply them at home. The consulting firm's language echoed phrases my brother had used casually. Smoother transition, reducing friction, keeping things calm for her sake. Even the word escalation had appeared once, in a text I'd dismissed as stress talking. "If this doesn't work, I'll have to escalate," he'd written after an argument with his ex. I'd thought he meant legal filings. Now I knew better. That night, after my niece went to bed, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Old correspondence, printed emails, notes from meetings I'd attended just to support him. I hadn't kept them because I was suspicious. I'd kept them because that's how my mind worked. Documentation mattered, even when I didn't know why. I spread the papers across the dining table and began lining them up by date. The picture that emerged was methodical. Requests coincided with milestones in the consulting firm's planning. My involvement increased when resistance from the ex-wife increased. I had been the buffer, the stabilizer, the face that made everything look reasonable. I found a note I'd written to myself after a particularly tense weekend. Just 3 lines on a yellow pad. She cried when he said she might move. Asked if she'd still see Mom. Check in. I remembered that day. I remembered telling myself kids get upset by change. I remembered telling my brother she needed reassurance. He'd smiled and thanked me. "You're good at this," he'd said. Good at what, exactly? The realization didn't come with a rush of anger. It came with a dull ache, like a muscle you didn't know you'd strained until you tried to use it. I had been proud of being steady, of being the one people relied on. I hadn't questioned why my brother relied on me so heavily, or why my role kept expanding without ever being clearly defined. The next morning, my attorney called. He'd reviewed the contract in full. "This isn't just aggressive planning," he said. "It's coercive, and your brother knew it." "He didn't threaten me," I said automatically. "You don't need an explicit threat," he replied. "Pressure works best when it feels like obligation." I thought about the escalation clause again. Reputational leverage. I thought about the way my brother had reacted when I submitted the document to the court. Not confusion. Not surprise. Fear. The kind that comes from losing control, not from being misunderstood. The ex-wife called later that afternoon. She sounded lighter than she had before, but cautious. "I need to tell you something," she said. I didn't before, because I wasn't sure it mattered. She told me about a conversation she'd had with my brother months earlier. He'd suggested that if she kept pushing back, certain things might come out. Comments she'd made during the marriage. Old emails taken out of context. He'd framed it as concern, as protection. She'd felt the warning even if she couldn't prove it. I closed my eyes as she spoke. The pattern tightened. "He said you understood," she added quietly. "That you agreed it was better if things stayed calm." I felt something crack then. Not loudly, just enough to let air in. "I never said that," I told her. "I know," she said. "I figured that out." After we hung up, I sat alone in the kitchen and stared at the wall. I thought about loyalty, how easily it slides into complicity when you're not paying attention. I thought about how power operates most effectively when it wears the face of family. My brother texted that evening. Another single line. "You're making a mistake." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood that responding was part of the system. Silence, this time, wasn't avoidance. It was refusal. Over the next few days, more details surfaced. The consulting firm's name appeared in public records connected to other custody cases. Not identical, but similar enough to notice. Rapid relocations, family members acting as intermediaries. Outcomes that looked clean on paper and messy everywhere else. I shared what I found with my attorney. He nodded. "This strengthens your position," he said, "and weakens his." "It's not about position," I said, surprising myself. "It's about stopping this." He looked at me for a long moment. "Those are rarely separate goals," he said. By the time the next hearing date was set, I felt different. Not calmer, clearer. The confusion that had made me doubt myself was gone. In its place was something firmer. a line I hadn't known I was allowed to draw. The pattern wasn't just my brother's, it was generational. Our father had controlled outcomes the same way, quietly, efficiently, convinced it was for everyone's good. I had spent my life believing I was different because I didn't crave control. I just didn't realize how easily I handed it over to someone who did. My niece crawled into my lap that night with her book. She read slowly, sounding out words, her finger tracking the page. I listened, really listened, to the cadence of her voice. This was the truth that mattered. Not the strategies, not the plans. A child learning to read in a place she felt safe. As she turned the page, I knew something else with certainty. Whatever came next, whatever my brother tried, I would not be used again. The pattern ended with me, whether he accepted it or not. By the time the next hearing approached, the question wasn't whether my brother had crossed a line. That had already been answered. The question that kept me awake was what it would cost to finish what I'd started. Exposing a plan is one thing. Exposing a person is another. And this person was my brother. Family gives conflict a longer shadow. Every memory becomes evidence. Every kindness feels compromised. I thought about holidays, about the way he used to show up late and take over conversations, about how I'd learned to step back without resentment. I had mistaken accommodation for peace. Now I understood it as training. The ex-wife and her attorney were preparing to push hard. They wanted the consulting firm named explicitly. They wanted to argue coercion, not just manipulation. My attorney laid out the risks plainly. "This will get ugly," he said. "Public record ugly. If we go this route, there's no controlling where it stops." I asked the question I'd been avoiding. What happens to him? My attorney didn't answer right away. "That depends on how much is uncovered," he said, "and how he responds when it is." "And my niece?" I asked. "That's the priority," he said, "but she won't be untouched by it." That was the part no one could soften. Children absorb conflict whether we name it or not. I could protect her from relocation, from being used as leverage, but I couldn't protect her from knowing that her father wasn't who she thought he was. The truth would reach her eventually. The only question was whether it would come with safeguards or in fragments. I drove home thinking about that, about whether there was a version of this where I could step back now, let the court handle the rest, and retreat into something quieter. I could say I'd done enough. I could say I'd acted when it mattered most. I could let the system grind forward without my direct involvement. But the pattern didn't stop on its own. Systems like this adapted. They found new routes, new intermediaries. I had been one without realizing it. Someone else would take my place. That night, my brother called. Not a text this time, an actual call. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "You don't have to destroy everything," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "We can fix this." "What does fixing it look like to you?" I asked. He sighed, as if burdened. "You stop pushing. Let the court decide. Let it settle." "It is settling," I said, "just not the way you planned." "You're making it personal," he said. "This was never about you." "It became about me when you used me," I said. There was a pause. Then, "You always overreact," he said. "You see conspiracies where there are none." I almost laughed. That line had worked for him for years. It was familiar, comfortable. I recognized it now for what it was, a dismissal designed to reset the balance. "You hired a firm to plan my niece's removal," I said. "You built contingencies around my behavior without telling me. That's not a misunderstanding." "You're exaggerating," he said. "I'm documenting," I replied. His tone shifted then. The warmth evaporated. "Do you know what this will do to her?" he asked. "To our family?" "I know what doing nothing would do," I said. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling the weight of the choice settle fully. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending a cycle. And cycles don't end quietly. The next morning, my niece had a school project due. She needed poster board and markers. We went to the store together. She debated colors seriously, like the decision mattered. I let her choose. On the drive home, she asked if her dad would come to her recital next month. "I don't know yet," I said. She nodded, accepting uncertainty the way children do when they trust the person answering them. That trust felt heavier than any legal consequence. Later that day, I met with my attorney again. He laid out the strategy. We would submit additional evidence. We would name the consulting firm's practices. We would position my testimony not as retaliation, but as correction. It was clean. It was strong. It would escalate things. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. I thought about the yellow note I'd found, about the misspelled name, about how close I'd come to never knowing. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. The ex-wife called that evening. "I heard from him," she said. "He wants to negotiate." "On what terms?" I asked. "That you step back," she said. "That he keeps primary custody. That this goes away." "And what do you want?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. "I want my daughter safe," she said. "I want this to stop." "So do I said. We agreed to move forward together. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the house settle, to the quiet sounds of a place that felt stable because it was honest. I thought about the first time my brother had asked me to help with my niece. How proud I'd been that he trusted me. How easily trust can be weaponized when no one checks it. In the early hours, I made a decision I hadn't planned on making. I wrote a statement. Not for the court, for my niece. Not something I'd give her now, or even soon. Something that would exist if she ever needed it. A record of what happened and why, without bitterness, without blame. Just the truth, laid out clearly. When the sun came up, I felt steadier. Not because the outcome was guaranteed, but because my role was. I wasn't the quiet support anymore. I wasn't the buffer. I was a boundary. At the courthouse, the air felt different, tighter. Reporters stood near the entrance. Someone had leaked something. The consulting firm's name was already circulating. My brother arrived flanked by his attorney, his expression controlled but strained. He didn't look at me. As we took our seats, I realized the final piece of the dilemma wasn't whether to expose him. That was already in motion. It was whether I would flinch when the cost became real. The clerk called the case. The judge entered. And as the proceedings began, I understood something with absolute clarity. There was no going back to the family we'd pretended to be. The only choice left was whether the truth would arrive incomplete or whether I would see it through, no matter how much it hurt. The judge opened the hearing by stating, clearly and without preamble, that the court had concerns about intent. That word landed harder than any accusation. Intent was what separated mistakes from schemes. My brother sat still, his hands folded, eyes forward. If you didn't know him, you might have thought he was calm. I knew better. He was conserving. The judge called my name first. I stood and walked to the podium. The wood was worn smooth, where thousands of hands had rested before mine. I placed my notes down, though I didn't plan to read them. I looked at the judge, then briefly at my brother. He avoided my eyes. "Miss Hayes," the judge said, "I want you to speak in your own words. Tell the court about your involvement." I took a breath. Not to steady myself, but to mark the moment. "I became involved because I was asked to help," I said. At first, that help looked like childcare, school pickups, meals, normal family support. I paused, letting the simplicity sit. Over time, the requests became more specific. Timing mattered. Locations mattered. I was asked to step in during conflicts, to reassure my niece when she was upset about potential changes. I was told this was to reduce stress. The judge nodded. "When did you realize something was wrong?" "The night before the first hearing," I said. "When I discovered a document that showed the outcome had already been planned." I described the file, the page, the dates, the contingency language. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. The structure spoke for itself. The ex-wife's attorney followed up, asking about patterns, about how often my assistance aligned with milestones in the consulting firm's planning. I answered honestly. Sometimes I didn't know. Sometimes I knew and didn't want to see it. Then my brother's attorney stood. "Miss Hayes," he said, "you love your niece, correct?" "Yes," I said. "And you love your brother?" I hesitated. "Not long, just enough." "I did," I said. "I still care about him, but love doesn't erase accountability." He shifted. "Isn't it possible," he said, "that you misinterpreted planning as manipulation because of stress?" "No," I said, "because I've spent my career distinguishing between the two." He tried again. He asked about my background, about whether my professional experience made me overly suspicious. I answered calmly. I didn't argue. I let his questions expose their own weakness. When I stepped down, my legs felt heavy, but my mind was clear. The judge called my brother next. He stood with practiced ease. He spoke about wanting the best for his daughter, about feeling unheard, about fear of losing time. He used words like protection and stability and love. They were words he'd always used well. Then the judge asked him about the escalation clause. His answer was careful. "It was theoretical," he said. "I never intended to use it." "Yet you approved it," the judge said. "Yes," he admitted. "And you did not inform your sister," she said. "No," he said. "And you positioned her to carry out aspects of this plan without her consent," she said. "I didn't see it that way," he replied. The judge leaned forward slightly. "How did you see it?" "As family helping family," he said. There it was. The reframing. The attempt to collapse intent into affection. The judge didn't accept it. She called the consulting firm's representative again. This time, the questions were sharper. Emails were read aloud. Language was dissected. The representative answered until he couldn't. Then, something shifted. The judge turned to my brother. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "were you aware that your consulting firm has used similar strategies in other cases that resulted in judicial sanctions?" My brother's attorney stood immediately. "Objection." "Overruled," the judge said. "Answer the question." My brother's mouth opened, then closed. "I was not aware of sanctions," he said. The consulting firm's representative cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, "that characterization—" "Sit down," the judge said. He did. The judge addressed the courtroom. "This court takes a dim view of strategies designed to circumvent transparency by exploiting trust," she said, "especially when those strategies involve a minor child." She ordered a brief recess. In the hallway, my brother finally looked at me. His face wasn't angry. It was calculating. "You've gone far enough," he said quietly. "Not far enough," I replied. "You think you're protecting her," he said. "You're tearing her family apart." "You did that," I said. "I just stopped helping you hide it." He leaned closer. "You have no idea what comes next." I met his gaze. "Neither do you." When we returned to the courtroom, the judge delivered her interim ruling. Custody would remain primarily with the mother. Any relocation would require explicit court approval. The consulting firm was ordered to provide full disclosure of its involvement, not just in this case, but in others within the jurisdiction. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "Miss Hayes," she said, "your testimony suggests you may have been subject to undue influence. This court recommends you seek independent counsel regarding your exposure." I nodded. "I already have." My brother's attorney whispered urgently to him. His composure cracked just enough for me to see panic underneath. The hearing adjourned. Outside, reporters approached. Microphones appeared. I stepped back. This wasn't my stage. The ex-wife spoke briefly, clear, controlled. She thanked the court and asked for privacy for her daughter. My brother left through a side exit. That evening, after my niece was asleep, my phone rang again. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. "This is Mark Delaney," the voice said. "I represent the consulting firm. We need to talk." "I don't," I said. "My attorney does." There was a pause. "You're misunderstanding your position," he said. "This doesn't end well for people who escalate." I felt a familiar calm settle over me. The kind that comes when a threat confirms what you already know. "You just made my case stronger," I said, and hung up. I sat in the quiet house and thought about the moment in the hallway when my brother said I'd gone far enough. What he meant was that I'd stepped outside the role he'd assigned me, the supportive sister, the silent fixer. That role was gone now. What came next wouldn't be resolved in a single hearing or a single ruling. It would take time, it would take consequences, and it would take something I had avoided for most of my life. Standing fully in the truth, even when it cost me the last illusion I had left about my family. The shift happened quietly, the way real turning points often do. There was no announcement, no dramatic decision spoken out loud. It was just the moment I realized that the process had outgrown the courtroom. What we were dealing with now wasn't only custody. It was exposure. And exposure doesn't stay contained. 2 days after the hearing, my attorney called and asked me to come in. Not urgently, deliberately. That tone told me more than his words would have. "The consulting firm is nervous," he said once I was seated. "They've retained separate counsel, and they're trying to frame this as an internal misunderstanding." "Of course they are," I said. "They've also started reaching out to other parties connected to similar cases," he continued. "Which means someone is preparing for fallout." I leaned back in the chair. "So this goes wider." "Yes," he said. "And once it does, your brother loses control of the narrative completely." That was the point of no return. I understood it clearly then. Up until now, there had been the illusion of containment, that this could be managed quietly, resolved procedurally, sealed in filings and rulings. But once patterns are identified publicly, silence stops being protection. It becomes implication. My attorney slid a folder across the desk. Inside were redacted case summaries from other jurisdictions, different names, different families, the same consulting firm, the same language, the same choreography of urgency, cooperation, and pressure. In 2 cases, judges had noted unusual family involvement. In one, a grandparent had suddenly withdrawn support without explanation. In another, a sibling had submitted documents late, altering the timeline just enough to change an outcome. I closed the folder. "They've done this before." "Yes," he said. And someone finally connected the dots. That someone, I realized, was me. Not because I was smarter than anyone else, but because I was positioned where the pattern intersected. I had been both insider and asset. That gave me visibility others didn't have. The question wasn't whether the truth would come out, it was how. That afternoon, my brother's attorney requested a private meeting. Not mediation, a conversation. I declined. I wasn't interested in persuasion anymore. Persuasion is what happens when one side still thinks control is possible. Instead, I met with the ex-wife and her attorney. We sat at a long table and reviewed options: civil action, complaints to regulatory boards, media inquiries. None of it felt satisfying. All of it felt necessary. "I don't want this to become a spectacle," she said quietly. "My daughter doesn't deserve that." "Neither do you," I said. "But there's a difference between spectacle and sunlight." She looked at me, weighing that. "What are you willing to do?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about my life before this, about retirement plans and quiet routines, about how much easier it would be to step back now that the immediate danger had passed. Then I thought about the phone call from the consulting firm's lawyer, about the word escalate, about the way my brother had said, "You have no idea what comes next." "I'm willing to be on the record," I said. "Fully." Her attorney nodded slowly. "That changes things." "Yes," I said. "That's the point." The first inquiry didn't come from the press. It came from a regulatory body, a formal request for information, narrow in scope, precise in language. It asked about my role, my communications, and whether I'd ever been informed of the firm's strategies. I answered truthfully, with my attorney present. I provided documents, emails, notes, the yellow pad, everything. A week later, the second inquiry came, broader, from another state, then a third. My brother stopped contacting me altogether. The silence felt intentional, strategic, as if he believed withdrawal might limit damage. It didn't. What surprised me was how quickly people began to reach out. Not reporters, not strangers, family friends, former colleagues, people who had watched our dynamic for years without understanding it. I always wondered, one said carefully. You did so much. Another was less cautious. He leaned on you, she said. We all saw it. I listened without responding much. Validation didn't change anything now. It just confirmed what I already knew. At home, life continued in small, ordinary ways. My niece did her homework. She complained about math. She practiced for her recital. Stability returned, not because the conflict was over, but because the uncertainty had narrowed. Children don't need perfection. They need predictability. One evening, as I was washing dishes, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You don't understand what you've triggered. No name, no signature. I deleted it. The next morning, my attorney called with news that felt like a door slamming shut somewhere behind us. The consulting firm has been formally named in a multi-state review, he said. And your brother has been identified as a cooperating client in at least 3 cases. Cooperating, I repeated. Yes, he said. Not victim. Not bystander. I closed my eyes. The language mattered. It always did. That afternoon, the ex-wife called. He wants to settle, she said. On what terms? I asked. He'll accept reduced custody. No relocation. No consulting firm involvement going forward. In exchange, he wants silence. I thought about that. About the appeal of quiet endings. About how tempting it would be to say yes and let everyone walk away intact. And you? I asked. She exhaled. I don't trust silence anymore. Neither do I said. We declined. The first article appeared online 3 days later. It wasn't sensational. It didn't use names in the headline. It described a pattern, a method, the use of private consultants to influence family court outcomes by exploiting trust networks. The details were familiar. My brother called that night. The first time since the hearing. This wasn't supposed to happen, he said. That's true, I replied. It wasn't. You've ruined everything, he said. No, I said. I interrupted it. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. You could have stopped, he said. So could you? I said. He hung up. I stood in the quiet kitchen, phone in my hand, and understood something I hadn't before. The exposure wasn't the punishment. It was the consequence. And consequences don't negotiate. The decision to go public hadn't been made in a single moment. It had unfolded, step by step, each refusal narrowing the path until there was only one direction left. Forward. Whatever came next, it would happen in the open. The public part didn't arrive with flashing lights or shouted questions. It arrived with a calendar invite. My attorney forwarded it without commentary. A joint session, regulatory observers, counsel present, location, downtown conference center, agenda, review of practices related to third-party custody consulting. The language was neutral. That's how institutions announce earthquakes. I told my niece I'd be gone most of the day. She asked if it was another court thing. I said yes. She nodded, already bored with the word. Children adapt faster than adults to new normal. The conference center was all glass and steel, designed to look transparent while controlling every entrance. Security badges, check-in desks, coffee stations no one touched. The consulting firm's logo was nowhere to be seen, which told me everything I needed to know. When companies know their name is a liability, they erase it first. My brother arrived 10 minutes late. He didn't look at me when he entered the room. He sat at the far end of the table, flanked by 2 attorneys I didn't recognize. His posture was rigid, like he was holding himself together by force. For the first time since this began, he looked exposed. The regulators introduced themselves and outlined the purpose of the session. Not an interrogation, not a trial, a fact-finding discussion. That distinction mattered. It meant the goal wasn't resolution, it was record. They started with the consulting firm's representatives. 2 men and a woman, all precise, all calm. They spoke about services, about client autonomy, about misunderstood intent. They emphasized discretion as if it were a virtue. Then the questions shifted. How were family members identified as cooperative assets? What criteria triggered escalation protocols? How often were clients advised to withhold information from courts? The answers grew slower. When my name came up, the room changed temperature. One of the regulators turned toward me. "Miss Hayes," she said, "we'd like to hear from you." I spoke the way I always had when explaining a failure analysis, chronologically, without accusation, without adjectives. I described requests, timing, assumptions. The moment I realized my role hadn't been accidental, my brother stared at the table. The regulator asked, "Did you consent to being part of this strategy?" "No," I said. "Were you informed your actions were part of a coordinated plan?" "No." "Did you feel pressure to comply with requests you didn't fully understand?" "Yes." There was no follow-up. None was needed. Then came the documents. Screens lit up around the room. Emails, contracts, internal notes, the escalation clause, the reputational leverage language, the misspelled name, my misspelled name. Someone had highlighted it. One of the regulators leaned forward. "This name appears consistently across internal documents," she said. "Was that deliberate?" The consulting firm's attorney began to speak. He stopped when she raised a hand. "We'll answer that later," she said. Then she turned to my brother. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "were you aware your sibling was listed internally as a leverage point?" My brother's jaw worked. "I didn't see it that way," he said. "That wasn't the question," she replied. "Were you aware?" "Yes," he said. The word landed with a finality I hadn't expected. Not relief, not satisfaction, just confirmation. Another regulator spoke. "And did you ever inform her?" "No." Silence filled the room, not awkward, decisive. The meeting ended without conclusions. That was by design. Conclusions come later, when damage is measured. Outside, reporters waited. Not many, just enough. The consulting firm's representatives exited through a side door. My brother followed them, head down. He didn't look back. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't need to. The record spoke for itself now. That evening, the article count doubled, then tripled. Names began to appear. Not mine, not yet. The consulting firms, my brother's, others. The phrase, "pattern of coercive planning," appeared in more than one headline. My brother called me just before midnight. "You wanted this," he said. His voice was hoarse. "You wanted to humiliate me." "No," I said. "I wanted you to stop. You could have handled this privately," he said. "You tried private?" I replied. "It only worked when no one was watching." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, the anger was gone. What replaced it was something thinner. "They're going to ruin me," he said. "They're going to document you," I said. "There's a difference." He hung up without responding. The next morning, my attorney called early. "There's something you should know," he said. "The regulators have requested expanded authority, and there's an addendum." "What kind of addendum?" I asked. "One involving financial disclosures," he said, "and potential kickbacks." I closed my eyes. The story wasn't widening, it was deepening. By midday, the consulting firm had suspended operations. By evening, their website was offline. A statement appeared, apologizing for any misunderstanding. It wasn't enough. At home, my niece practiced her recital piece in the living room. She stumbled over a line and laughed at herself. I clapped anyway. She bowed dramatically. "Did I do good?" she asked. "You did great," I said. She smiled and ran off to find a snack. Life continued in moments like that, indifferent to exposure and consequence. That night, another message arrived from an unknown number. "You think you've won. You haven't seen the worst of it." I stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down. The worst had already happened, not publicly, privately. The moment I understood who my brother really was, everything else was just accounting. The collapse didn't come all at once. It came in notices, certified letters, subpoenas, requests for preservation. Each envelope carried the same weight, regardless of sender. They stacked on my kitchen counter like a slow-moving tide. I didn't open them alone anymore. My attorney came by in the evenings, sleeves rolled up, reading quietly while I made tea neither of us drank. The addendum turned into an investigation. The investigation turned into coordination. States shared information. Regulators compared notes. The consulting firm's misunderstandings became inconsistencies, then contradictions. Someone leaked internal communications. Someone else followed the money. That was the moment my brother stopped being treated as a client and started being treated as a participant. I learned this from the news, not from him. The article didn't use dramatic language. It didn't need to. It laid out timelines, referenced filings, quoted sources close to the inquiry. It noted that certain clients had received incentives for referrals and cooperation. It didn't say kickbacks. It let readers draw their own conclusions. My brother's name appeared in the middle of the piece, not highlighted, not hidden, just there. He showed up at my house an hour later. I knew it was him before I opened the door. Some instincts never leave you. He looked older than he had a week ago. Not tired. Worn. His suit jacket hung open. His tie was gone. "We need to talk," he said. "Not here," I said, glancing toward the hallway. He nodded once. We walked to the porch and sat on opposite ends of the bench. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The street was quiet. A dog barked somewhere down the block. "They're saying things," he said finally. "They're documenting things," I replied. He laughed, short and humorless. "You've always been good with words." I didn't respond. "They're coming after everything," he said. "My job, my reputation, my finances." "You planned for that," I said. He turned to me sharply. "I planned to win," he said. "I didn't plan for you." There it was. Not an apology. Not even surprise. Just acknowledgement. "You used me," I said. "I relied on you," he countered. "You relied on my silence," I said. "That's not the same thing." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. For the first time, I saw something like fear break through. Not for his daughter, not for his family, for himself. "They're asking about money," he said quietly. "Transfers, consulting fees." I said nothing. "They think I benefited," he continued. "They think I referred others." "Did you?" I asked. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. "I did what I had to do," he said eventually. "Everyone does." "No," I said. "They don't." He looked up at me then, eyes bloodshot. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said. "I think I stopped you." That seemed to land harder than anything else I'd said. He sat back, deflated. "They're offering something," he said after a moment. "A way out." I waited. "Cooperation," he said. "If I help them build the case against the firm." "And?" I asked. "And I need you to step back," he said. "Publicly. No more statements. No more participation." I felt a familiar pressure then, the old instinct to smooth things over, to fix, to help him land on his feet. "No," I said. His head snapped up. "You don't understand," he said. "If I go down, it all goes down." "It already has," I said. "You could still stop this," he insisted. "Say you misunderstood. Say you overreacted. Say I lied?" I asked. "Say whatever you need to," he said. "For the family." I stood. "This is over," I said. "You should leave." He stood too, anger flaring. "You're choosing strangers over blood," he said. "I'm choosing truth over manipulation," I replied. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "You always needed to be right," he said. I almost corrected him. Almost explained that this had never been about rightness, about winning or losing. But explanations are wasted on people who hear them as threats. "Go," I said. He left without another word. 2 days later, the indictment came. Not his alone. The consulting firm's executives, several associated attorneys, charges varied. Fraud, conspiracy, misrepresentation. My brother was named as a cooperating witness, not a defendant, for now. The article said his cooperation was under review. I felt no relief, no satisfaction, just a settling, like dust after a collapse. At the next custody review, the judge finalized the arrangement. Primary custody with the mother, supervised visitation for my brother, pending the outcome of ongoing investigations. No relocation. No third-party consultants. The ruling was calm, decisive. My niece asked if her dad was in trouble. He's dealing with some things, I said. Adults sometimes make choices they have to answer for. She considered that. Will he still come to my recital? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. She nodded, then went back to practicing. The consulting firm's offices were raided the following week. Boxes carried out, computers seized, employees escorted. The news footage played silently on my television while I folded laundry. That night, I received an email from the consulting firm's former counsel. It was brief. It thanked me for my cooperation. It asked if I'd be willing to provide additional testimony. I forwarded it to my attorney without comment. The final twist arrived not with drama, but with a footnote. My attorney called one afternoon and asked if I was sitting down. We've identified something, he said. What? I asked. The initial referral, he said. The first time your brother connected with the consulting firm. Yes, I said. It wasn't during the divorce, he continued. It was years earlier. I felt a chill. When? When your parents' estate was settled, he said. The firm advised him then, different service, same methodology. I closed my eyes. The relocation plan wasn't the beginning, he said. It was a continuation. The pattern didn't start with my niece. It started with inheritance. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew about my family history shifted. The inheritance files were older than I expected. Yellowed edges, letterhead from firms that no longer existed. The past has a way of resurfacing when you finally know how to read it. My attorney spread the documents across his desk and waited while I absorbed what I was seeing. Dates lined up with decisions I'd never questioned. Asset allocations, trust structures. The quiet sale of property I'd been told was too complicated to maintain. Each move had been justified at the time as efficiency, as necessity. As foresight, the consulting firm's name appeared in the margins. Abbreviated, almost shy. Advisory capacity, strategic planning, risk mitigation. The language was softer then, less confident. They were learning, just like my brother was. You were excluded from these discussions, my attorney said. Deliberately. I nodded. I didn't need confirmation. I could feel it in my body, the way old realizations settle differently than new ones. This wasn't betrayal that stung. It was architecture revealed. After our parents died, I had trusted my brother to handle things because he'd offered. He'd told me I didn't need the stress, that he'd take care of it. I'd been grateful. I'd been grieving. I'd been tired. The consulting firm had helped him then too, not with custody, with consolidation, with positioning, with control. They advised him to minimize the number of decision-makers, my attorney continued, to reduce resistance. Resistance. Even then, what about me? I asked. They identified you as a stabilizing influence, he said. Someone whose cooperation would ensure compliance without scrutiny. I thought about that phrase. Stabilizing influence. It sounded flattering until you understood what it meant. I wasn't meant to question. I was meant to absorb shock so others didn't have to. The house I lived in. The funds I'd assumed were allocated fairly. The sense that things had always been slightly tilted in his favor, but not enough to contest. It all rearranged itself in my mind, snapping into place. My brother hadn't started using me when his marriage failed. He'd been using me since our parents were buried. The weight of that realization was different from everything else, heavier. Not because of money, but because of time. Years of decisions made without my knowledge. Years of trust extended in one direction only. I want to be clear, my attorney said carefully. This doesn't necessarily change the legal outcome of the custody case, but it changes how regulators view his relationship with this firm. And with me, I said. Yes, he agreed. You were a constant. That matters. I drove home slowly that evening, not because I needed time, but because I didn't trust myself to move too fast. Some truths don't need urgency. They need space. At home, My niece was at the table doing homework. She looked up and smiled. The normalcy of it felt almost surreal. I sat across from her and watched her write her name at the top of the page, careful and precise. "What are you working on?" I asked. "Family tree," she said. "We have to draw one." I felt something tighten in my chest. "What do you have so far?" I asked. She pointed. "Mom and Dad. And you." I smiled. "That's a good start." That night, after she went to bed, I pulled out my own files, old bank statements, trust documents, letters I'd never reread because I assumed they said what I'd been told they said. I read them now, with new eyes. The consulting firm's fingerprints were everywhere, not obvious, subtle, language adjusted here, options framed there, decisions nudged just enough to create outcomes that looked organic. I wasn't just collateral. I was infrastructure. My brother didn't just exploit a moment of crisis. He built a system around me, one that depended on my reliability and my silence, one that allowed him to move faster, cleaner, without challenge. The next day, I met with the ex-wife again. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her expression steady. "He's always needed an audience," she said when I finished. "Someone to reflect back that he was right." I nodded. "I didn't realize that's what I was doing." "You didn't choose it," she said. "That matters." It did, but it didn't absolve me of the time I'd spent playing the role. The regulators requested another statement. This time, it wasn't about custody or consulting practices. It was about history, about when the relationship began, about whether the strategies used in family court mirrored earlier behavior. I answered everything, slowly, thoroughly. When my brother learned about the inheritance connection surfacing, he called me again. His voice was strained, stripped of pretense. "You went back that far?" he asked. "I went where the facts led," I said. "That was years ago," he said. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters because it shows a pattern," I replied. "And patterns don't expire." He was silent. "Then you're rewriting everything," he said. "No," I said. "I'm finally reading it." The call ended without resolution. Weeks passed. The investigation expanded. Settlements were discussed. The consulting firm's executives began distancing themselves from clients. Cooperation turned selective. My brother's name appeared again. Not as a witness this time, as a subject. I didn't celebrate. I didn't grieve. I accepted. The final hearing came quietly. No press. No spectacle. The judge summarized findings and issued orders. Custody remained unchanged. Restrictions stayed in place. Recommendations were forwarded. When it was over, I walked out into the sunlight and felt lighter than I had in months. At home, my niece ran to show me her finished family tree. She'd added grandparents. She'd added cousins. She'd drawn lines in bright marker, confident and uncomplicated. I looked at it and understood something I hadn't before. Family isn't defined by who controls the narrative. It's defined by who tells the truth when it's hardest. The collapse I'd promised myself in that stalled elevator had happened. Not all at once, not loudly, but completely. And for the first time in a very long time, what remained felt real. 6 months passed before anything felt like an ending. Not because the legal process dragged on, though it did, but because endings inside families don't arrive with dates. They arrive quietly, in the absence of something you expected to feel. My brother pleaded out. Not publicly, not dramatically. A negotiated agreement, financial penalties, permanent restrictions on his involvement in third-party custody consulting, cooperation clauses that required ongoing disclosure. His name disappeared from headlines as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by broader discussions about reform and oversight. Systems protect themselves by absorbing individuals. He lost his job. That part was inevitable. Employers don't like attention that comes with footnotes. He moved out of state shortly after, not because he was ordered to, but because staying meant being recognized. Distance had always been his solution. He did not say goodbye. The consulting firm dissolved under a different name. Its website vanished. Its executives resurfaced elsewhere, quieter, rebranded. The investigations produced recommendations, then policies, then memos that would be cited in future cases by people who never knew why they existed. That's how accountability often looks. Infrastructural, invisible. The custody arrangement held. My niece settled into routines that didn't change every few weeks. She stopped asking where she would live next. She started inviting friends over without checking first. Stability, it turns out, isn't loud. It's boring in the best way. She still saw her father, supervised, scheduled, contained. She learned quickly which topics stayed safe. Children adapt. It's not resilience, it's survival. I didn't interfere. I didn't comment. I answered her questions honestly when she asked them, and stayed quiet when she didn't. That was the hardest lesson for me. Learning when silence was protection, not compliance. I stayed in the house. I didn't sell it, even though the inheritance files made it clear I could have demanded more years ago. I didn't want restitution. I wanted clarity. I wanted to know that what I kept was mine by choice, not design. I updated my will. I reorganized accounts. I invited a financial advisor who worked for no one I didn't choose. Boundaries, once you learn how to set them, become surprisingly transferable. My brother sent one final email. No apology, no explanation, just a line acknowledging that things had gone further than intended. I didn't respond. Intent had stopped mattering a long time ago. People asked if I regretted exposing him. They asked if I wished I'd handled it privately, if I'd considered the long-term impact on family ties. I told them the truth. If I'd stayed quiet, my niece would have been moved across state lines under the cover of planning. If I'd stepped back after the first hearing, the consulting firm would still be operating, refining its methods. If I'd protected my brother's image, I would have confirmed to him that using people works as long as you choose the right ones. Silence wouldn't have preserved the family, it would have preserved the lie. What surprised me most was how little anger I carried once it was over. Not because forgiveness arrived, but because clarity replaced confusion. Anger feeds on uncertainty. Once the truth is visible, there's nothing left for it to work with. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, my niece and I sat at the kitchen table assembling a puzzle. She worked methodically, sorting pieces by shape instead of color. She'd developed her own logic. I watched her concentrate, unbothered by the past, anchored in the present. "Did you know," she said suddenly, "that trees can grow back stronger after they break?" "I didn't," I said. "My teacher told us," she continued. "It's called regrowth." I smiled. "That sounds right." She placed the final piece and looked up, proud. In that moment, the scale of everything shifted. Power, family, hidden truth, those were adult words for something simpler. Protection, honesty, responsibility. I used to think being the steady one meant absorbing impact so others didn't have to feel it. I was wrong. Being steady means refusing to carry weight that was never yours to hold. The collapse I feared didn't destroy us, it revealed us, and what was left imperfect, quieter, smaller was finally real. That was the consequence, and it was enough.